The following is a guide to the paper, and it's a generic guide to the paper, so it doesn't cover the particulars for the paper that will be done in the particular class you're enrolled in. This video covers the deadlines, how to turn in the paper, and associated matters. Now, perhaps the most critical thing for the paper is the matter of time. And there are, past the draft, there are basically 3 deadlines. The first one is the +5 deadline, also sometimes known as the on-time bonus deadline. And that'll be set at a particular time on a particular date. Typically, in terms of the time, it is typically set to the end of class on the day that the paper deadline is set. So, for example, if you happen to be in my spring semester modern philosophy class, which goes from 12:30 to 1:45, in that case, the paper deadline would be 1:45 at that day. And of course, a particular date for the deadline is set by the class. Now, in terms of the +5 deadline, basically, if you turn your paper in by that deadline, you get +5 points added onto the paper as a bonus reward for turning the paper in on time. Now, suppose you run into some difficulties or trouble, like you have, things that interfere with you getting the paper done, or you want to revise it, or you have trouble with your computer, or some such thing. But there's also a second deadline after that. That is the full credit deadline. And typically, the full credit deadline is set on a date during the week, and it's focused around the end of my office hours for that day, typically. And so be sure to check when the full credit deadline is and what the particular date is. And the reason why I set it on that time is that way I can be checking on Blackboard to see if things are going wrong, and then I can correct them, as opposed to having it due, say, at midnight when I am generally asleep. Now, if you happen to miss the full credit deadline, there's still a chance to get some credit for the paper. There's the 50% credit deadline. Now, this deadline is generally the last day that I have office hours during the course of the normal semester. It's typically also the last day that we'll have class for most classes. And if you turn the paper in by the 50% credit deadline, you'll get half credit. And this is typically at the very end of the semester, right before finals week. So there are basically 3 times in which the paper can be turned in to get the +5 points, which is essentially extra credit, turned in by the +5 deadline. If you want to get full credit on the paper, be sure that it's turned in by the full credit deadline. And again, be sure to check the time. Don't assume that the full credit deadline is like at midnight that day. Similarly for the 50% credit deadline. If you want to get some credit, and of course half credit is better of some, is better than full credit of nothing. So those are the 3 deadlines. And these are actual deadlines. In the case of the +5 deadline, there's no exception to that, because it's a bonus for drawing the paper by that deadline. The full credit deadline, extensions are possible in the case of dire circumstances. For example, during the Iraq, Afghanistan conflicts, occasionally people were called up to serve. And in those cases, I was obviously happy to give a student an extension. Or there are other cases where students have been severely injured in automobile accidents, for example, and have had a broken arm. And in that case, of course, extensions were granted. So extensions, they're detailed in the paper guide, but they're granted only in very extreme circumstances. Again, things like being deployed to Afghanistan, being deployed to Iraq, having your arm shattered in an automobile accident. If someone has a case of, say, the sniffles, or their car, breaks down, or they're feeling kind of, sad that day, that doesn't qualify for extension. But be sure to check out the guidelines to the extension before counting on getting one. Now, in addition to the matter of time, there's also the matter of turning the paper in. Now, I've gotten to a Blackboard-only system of turning the paper in. What you'll do basically is go to the Blackboard site, and there'll be a link which will allow you to turn in the paper. And what I'll do is set up essentially safe assign assignments. There'll be 3. The +5 one will go up first, and then at that deadline it will vanish from Blackboard. Then the full credit deadline will appear, and then after that deadline expires, then the 50% credit deadline will go up, and after that deadline expires, that will vanish as well. The reason why I have the paper turned in by Blackboard, there are a variety of reasons. One is for convenience for you, because over the years, students often suffer mysterious car troubles or other problems when the paper is due. This way you don't worry about any car problems or even coming to campus. You just have to have access to Blackboard, which can be done through smartphones, computers, etc. The second reason is that way I know exactly when the paper is turned in. Time and date stamps it. That way there's no controversy or concerns should a grade discussion arise about when the paper exactly was turned in. Also, it allows me to have a copy available to provide for assessment. Assessment is a very critical thing these days in terms of getting our money from the state. We have to prove that we're actually doing stuff, and I'm often called upon to provide copies of papers and other work anonymously to have them part of the assessment process. And this allows me to have very convenient access to them. And so those are the main reasons why it's Blackboard only. And again, it's Blackboard only. If you bring me a printed copy of the paper as the final version, I won't accept it. It has to be done through Blackboard. Now you want to plan ahead of time, because if you wait to the last possible second and there's trouble, then you very well miss the deadline. And so again, the deadlines are deadlines. That is the deadline by which I'll accept, say, the +5 bonus, the full credit thing, the half credit thing. So definitely do not wait to the last minute, or if things go wrong, that could be bad. Now the papers get turned in through Safe Assign, and what that does is it goes through and checks the web and other papers that students have turned in throughout the country, the systems that use Safe Assign, and checks for cases of copying. And it'll give you a report on the percentage of the paper ranging from 0 to 100%, which is coming from other sources. Now, if you get a high score on your, in terms of the amount that's similar to other papers, don't panic, because the Safe Assign thing doesn't distinguish between, say, legitimately quoting sources and actual plagiarism. So what I do is I go in manually and check the paper. So I found, there are papers that might have 20% or even 30% from other sources, but it turns out it's legitimate because everything is properly cited. Now, before uploading your paper to Blackboard, check and double check to make sure that your paper is the correct file. Make sure you're not uploading the wrong one, make sure it's the right paper for the course, make sure you get all the stuff in there, and double or triple check that before uploading. Because I don't accept Blackboard related excuses, because I have no way of telling between someone making an honest mistake, selecting the wrong file, uploading it, and someone cleverly putting in the wrong paper in order to get extra time. So double, triple check your paper before turning it in. Now, if there is a legitimate problem with Blackboard, then I'll be able to see that, and I will work with you. But those are pretty rare. But if it does happen, I of course take that into account. But if it's simply uploading the wrong file, I really can't help you with that. So double or triple check before uploading it. Now, one thing you definitely want to avoid is plagiarism. Plagiarism is turning in work that is copied from someone else without giving them due credit. Now, the best way to avoid plagiarism is obviously just don't copy from other places. Now, of course, there are times when you use legitimate sources, and what you'll want to do is properly cite those sources using footnotes, endnotes, bibliography, etc. Now, I don't impose a particular style. I don't make people learn a new style like APA or Chicago or MLA. Use whatever is used in your major, whatever you feel comfortable with, but be sure to properly cite it. Now, if you don't know how to cite sources, be sure to get a style guide for doing that. I include a basic guide in the paper information, but get the for example, the MLA style or APA style. But the main thing is to make sure that you properly cite stuff. Put quote marks around it for short quotes, put an endnote or footnote, And if you're using long quotes, be sure to do the appropriate thing, indenting, symbol spacing, etc. Now, plagiarism, of course, is bad. And sort of the least that would happen would be a 0 on the paper. And since the paper tends to be a decent chunk of the grade, that would be bad. And so, and of course, there's also the possibility of academic misconduct, and safe assign makes that real easy to prove. So the basic takeaway is don't plagiarize. Now, people often do this because they're desperate. You know, it's the last minute, got to get that paper done. But trust me, you're better off just writing as fast as you can and turning in something that's your own rather than plagiarizing. Because plagiarism is bad. Now, when the paper is graded, you are welcome to discuss this grade with me, because I'm well aware that even though I have, very, very detailed standards and rubrics for the paper, and I, break this all down in the paper guide, that there is a degree of subjectivity and obviously a degree of judgment in the paper. So if you believe that the grade in your paper is unjust, does not match the quality of your work, then I encourage you to come in during my office hours to discuss the paper grade. Now, this grade discussion is no risk, at least mostly. By this I mean, if you come in and talk about the grade, your grade can get lower. So if you come in with an 83 and you discuss it with me, I won't start knocking off points just to be, evil. There is one exception though. If in the course of the discussion I somehow determine the paper is plagiarized, then of course that could result in a 0. But otherwise, with the exception of a discovery of plagiarism, then the grade discussion is no risk. If you walk in with an 83 and the paper is not plagiarized, you would walk out at worst with an 83. Now, in order for me to go over the paper with you, I'll need something to look at. Now, if you're in a hybrid or traditional class, you'll need to bring a paper copy, printed copy, into my office hours. And what I'll do, to avoid cleverness, is I'll confirm that the printed copy matches the one on Blackboard to double check to make sure they're the same paper. And now, what you have to do is basically make your case to show me what is it about the paper itself that entails that the grade should be improved. You have to show in there, for example, if I say the summary is missing points, you have to show the points are in there. If I say the arguments are poorly developed, you have to show how they're actually developed. If I say you don't address the issue, you have to show me how you address the issue. Matters that are irrelevant, things like needing a particular grade to graduate, or needing to keep a particular grade to get a car from one's parents, or telling me that you get really good grades in all your other papers. Those don't affect the grade. It has to be something within the paper. So your objective is to show me that I misgraded your paper, that somehow there are points in there that I missed. Now, again, I'm happy to do this. When I was a student, I would go and talk to professors if I believed that my grade was unfair. And sometimes they convinced me that they were in fact right. Other times I convinced them that I, in fact, had deserved more points. So, again, if you believe your grade is not just and fair, come into my office hours and talk to me about the paper. Now, a final thing to keep in mind is that the last time I'll talk about the paper is during my last office hours of the semester. So if someone, comes wandering up, say after the final or after the semester is over and says, hey, can I talk about the paper? I'll say, sure, we can talk about the paper, but I can't change your grade at this point. So be sure to check your grade on the paper, and be sure, if you believe the grade is unjust or unfair, to come in and talk to me before time runs out. Otherwise, it will be too